Hi, welcome. This video requires that you've taken a look at the iceberg presentation and the life scripts and parts matrix model. In these videos, we looked at how the wounding occurs and how contempt and shame and abandonment develops as a false self covering up the true self, which is like the sun shining behind the clouds. And then because it becomes so uncomfortable inside, we learn to develop an external focus and then put on a mask or cover up of the invented self. A public image covering up our private image, which is not really who we are. This is who we are. And then we get these efforts at finding comfort and relief at the tip of the iceberg, known as addictions and compulsions and obsessions. So watch that video so you can get a good understanding of how this works. And then the life scripts and parts matrix model is built around the fact that the abandonment, shame, and contempt, that layer here of woundedness, infection, and scab, are the problems in our fight and flight self-preservation system. If you notice these two boxes up here, the self-actualization is growth mode. That's becoming all that we're meant to be, and we're free to be in the moment and make good decisions from our self that's not a part. But when we get triggered into survival mode or self-preservation mode, all of this stuff lights up down here. And we have fight, flight, freeze, submit, and attach parts for a reason. They're all part of a normal personality. But the other parts that are in the categories of fight, flight, freeze, submit, and attach are contaminated by the abandonment, shame, and contempt. So this is the real problem, and this is what needs to be healed. Go ahead and watch that video as well. So with this video, I want to go over like a 30,000 foot view of how to heal that. And in order to do that, I use a combination of ego state therapy and internal family systems and gestalt therapy, along with a few other compatible approaches. But the iceberg and the 8 C's of the spiritual true self are the tools that we're going to need in order to heal the woundedness of abandonment, shame, and contempt. So there's another video on parts and ego states and understanding them that you'll be able to look at too. But for now, let's just look at what tools we really need to have in place in order to heal the wounds of abandonment, shame, and contempt. So again, the iceberg is a representation of a human being, and the water line is the dividing line between what's in our conscious mind and what's in our subconscious beneath the surface. Now above the surface we have this invented self, or this getting on with normal life part. It's the part that gets us out of bed and we go to work and we pay our bills. I call it the grocery getting, bill paying, job doing, executive functioning, problem solving, and decision making part. And it gets the job done. So it gets on with normal life, and it lives in the now, in the present moment. And this moment is very slim. Everything I've just said is in the past, and everything I'm going to say is in the future. And all we have right now is this little sliver of time where we can exercise our free will and make some healthy choices. Now, in order to heal the stuff underneath the waterline, the healthy choice is to be able to go inside and work with the parts of self that were outlined in the presentation on the life scripts and parts matrix model. So if we look beneath the surface, the first thing we're going to run into are the protector parts of self. And they're there just for that reason. They're the guardians of the gate, and they protect what's underneath. What we need to do is connect with our true spiritual self. Some people call it the inner strength, and some call it the core self. You can call it whatever you need to, but this is like the sun shining behind the clouds. It's our inner strength and our spiritual core. And it's there, and it speaks to us through intuition. And so the protectors, though, are there to protect against the woundedness, and the woundedness is carried by the exiled parts. And these are also known as the wounded inner children, or vulnerable ego states, or angry defiant ego states, and they're exiled and buried deep down in the psyche, so that the pain that they carry and the burdens that they carry either cannot overwhelm us or they cannot be injured even more. And the protector's job is to make sure that either we're protected from being engulfed by those burdens, or we're protected from causing even more pain internally. And so in order to heal the exiled parts, which is the wounded inner children, that's where we need to go. We can't get there unless we have the permission of the protector parts of self. And some people call those psychological defense mechanisms or ego states or other protector parts. But you can call them guardians or whatever you want. But they are neural pathways that have been encoded in the neural matrix of our mind in order to set up fail-safe protections against further woundedness and so forth. But we want to be able to work with those parts. In order to do that, we need to get into the true self. And the way we know that we're in the true self is that we have curiosity, compassion, connectedness, creativity, clarity, calmness, courage, and confidence. These are the 8 C's. Recently, another C has been added, and it was choice. Choice is our choice to either do this work or not. And pain is optional. So in order to be able to get, again, to the wounded parts, we have to make friends with the protector parts. And we need to get to know the inner landscape, if you will. And that's what the LSPMI, Life Scripts and Parts Matrix Inventory, and the Self-Preservation System Summary is all about, is being able to start getting a lay of the land underneath the surface there and see what kind of parts and protectors and exiles that we're dealing with. And then one of the ways to work with them, or the way that I like to, is a process I put together based on a lot of other processes I've learned, and this is just my packaging of it. I call it the Radical Reintegration Process. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Okay. So the Radical Reintegration Process is an acronym. Radical is an acronym for the phases that we go through in the healing process. And the very first phase is recognizing reactivity. We want to notice the physical sensation, that's the neuroception. We want to notice the negative thoughts, which are the perception, and or the impulse to act out. What is the behavior that we act out, either impulsively or compulsively. And then we identify the location of that physical sensation in the body and describe it in words. Now, you may remember we talked before about perception versus neuroception. Neuroception is the physical sensations that we notice along the midline of the vagus nerve pathway. Goes from the base of the brain all the way down the midline down to the belt buckle and below. And that's like a big tree taproot. And it's got branches that go off and connect with all the vital organs, the thoracic organs. And the job of the vagus nerve is to monitor how all of our organs are functioning and whether or not they're in harmony and so forth. But it also has another job of sending these physical signals back to our brain. And when we do, then the brain wants to know what that is, and so it goes through a Rolodex of other experiences and comes up with a label, like, oh, that's grief or anger or sadness. And that's the perception kicking in, the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking brain. And that's deciding, okay, that's what I'll call that. That's anger or that's bitterness because so-and-so said this or that, which was the trigger. But the physical sensation, it is part of the body, and it is unconscious or subconscious, and it's in polyvagal theory, it's a sensation that is created by a part of self or one of those protectors or exiles that gets triggered. And so we want to tune into the neuroception first. We want to notice what's going on in the body before we employ our thinking brain and come up with perception about that. Now, we could just strictly go with perception, and maybe 50% of the time we're right, or 60 or 70 even, but it's quite possible that we're wrong about what's going on in there. And so neuroception helps us track it down, helps us unpack it. And if we just notice that physical sensation, and maybe even the negative thought that goes with it or the impulse to act out, we just notice that. That's our first thing, is recognize, okay, I've got that kick in the gut, or I got that heaviness in the chest. Then we can go on to the next stage, which is to allow that feeling to exist, appreciate that it's either a protector needing to help me or an exile needing to be helped. and then ask the part to come forward. We'll get into that in a minute, but allowing it to exist goes against our natural instincts. Our natural instincts, when we experience discomfort, is to try and get rid of or get away from it. We get rid of it with the fight parts of self, and we get away from it with flight. And if we can't get rid of it or get away from it, we might even collapse into it and freeze. So we try to push that away or ignore that or distract ourselves from it. And what we really need to do if we're going to heal these wounds is to allow the feeling to exist and just let that kick in the gut or that heaviness in the chest, let it exist, appreciate it's a signal from a part of me, and ask that part to come forward. We can ask a question like, would the part of me responsible for this kick in the gut or heaviness in the chest please give me an image of yourself? It may come across as an image of me or someone I know, or it may be a symbol. It could be a green mist or some other symbol, depending on how the part presents itself. And we don't want to try and figure it out. That's employing the prefrontal cortex and the perception. We want to wait for the intuition, because when we're curious and we have all these C's going on, curiosity and compassion and really appreciating the part, even though we don't like the behavior, then that part is likely to come forward. What I mean by that is the intuition will answer our curiosity. Curiosity is a request and intuition is the response. And that intuition then helps us to go to the neural network in our circuitry to be able to communicate with that part. So we have to allow it to exist, appreciate even if we don't like what it's doing. Even methamphetamine using parts have a positive intention, but their strategy is faulty. So we can separate the part from the behavior and appreciate that at least the part is trying to do something important for us, either protect us or carry a burden and so forth. And so then we invite that part to come forward. As we do and we get that image, we want to notice, where does it seem located? Is it in my mind's eye, or is it out in front of me or next to me or somewhere outside of me? The reason we do that is because we want to disidentify. If we're identified with the part, then it's in the driver's seat of our bus, if you will. If our life is a bus, then there's only one driver's seat there. And so disidentifying means separating from that part and projecting it out in front of us, at least 18 inches or 2 feet out in front of us, and see that image out there, which frees me up to be in my body and in my nervous system and be present and available for that part. So disidentify is to let the image pop into your awareness, don't rule anything out, separate from the part to create a dyad or a twosome so you can better communicate with it. Again, at least 18 inches away, and let the part know you're not trying to get rid of it or get away from it. You want to get to know it. Even if it's a part that you don't like what they do, you can still have compassion and curiosity about the part itself. Now, sometimes we run into an objecting part that really hates the part that we're working with, and so it blends with our nervous system, and we need to work with that part. And we'll talk about that in another video, but just suffice it to say that when we have an objecting part, usually they'll stand aside. If you ask that part to take one step to the left or right, it'll choose one side, and can imagine in your mind's eye seeing a form on whatever side it chooses and just asking that part to stand down. Usually they will stand down or chill out and watch while you get in those 8 C's and begin working with that part. So listen with curiosity to your intuition in order to make all this happen. It's not very difficult, and we don't try to make it happen. We just get curious about what will happen and then just let it happen. And when we do separate from that part, we have that twosome or that dyad, we want to start communicating with it. So that's where the I in radical comes in. We begin to investigate and interview the part. What we want to discover is the deep purpose. And we can use a downward arrow technique, for instance, like we ask the part, what is your positive intention for signaling me with this kick in the gut or heaviness in the chest? And the part might say protection. And then we might ask, well, if I am protected just the way you want me to be, what's the positive intention of being protected? What am I being protected from? And what will and what will be the thing, what are you concerned about will happen if you don't do your job? You just keep asking until you start going in circles or draw the blank. You might start out with protection and end up with the core state of happiness. So that's the deep purpose of the outcome chain. Now, protective parts have a short outcome chain. Growth-oriented parts have a longer one. And that, again, will be in another video. We'll talk about that and even demonstrate that. But for now, there's three major questions that we want to find out when we begin to investigate and we make friends with that part and we get it to come forward and we can see it. Then we want to ask it things like, how old was I when I very, very first created you, this part of me? And then you just listen with curiosity and wait for the intuition, and this part will take you back to the very first time or a first time. Now, if you go to the very first time, maybe 3 or 4 years old is when that happened, or something happened where this part had to come along to help. Well, that's called the imprint of a gestalt of memories related to that category of memories. So it's the very first, or the imprint experience. Everything that follows, any other similar experiences, go on that on that chain like a string of pearls. Each pearl is a new experience, but after the imprint, everything else is called a reference experience, and it just strengthens the core beliefs that go with the imprint experience. So we really want to know, how old was I when I very, very first created you, this part of me? The part may say 7 years old, and I always like to double check, like, well, is that how old I was when I very first created you, this part of me? And then it might go 4. And so then there's a memory at 4, and then maybe even a worse memory at 7. But the imprint is at 4, and we don't want to miss that. And we'll get into healing that in a little bit. Another question to ask is, what are you afraid might happen if you stop doing your job? So if this is a protector that stops protecting, what's it afraid might happen? Don't be surprised if you hear something like, you might die, or you might lose your mind, or something terrible will happen. And then, so you want to find out what it's afraid will happen, and then ask anything else you want to know. And the goal is to befriend the part and get to understand and get to know the part. So you can ask anything, and if you don't know what to ask, just be curious about what would be the next good question to ask if I wanted to make friends with this part. And so then you just continue with that until you're ready to go to the next step, which is to call the true self forward. So when we do that, we call the true self forward, we ask, what are some unintended negative consequences or outcomes to this strategy of the kick in the gut or heaviness in the chest? And find out what those unintended consequences are. And all we need to do is, when I say go to the true self, is just to focus really deep inward and have faith that your core self or your true spiritual self is there, and just ask, what are some unintended negative consequences that come from this strategy? And then you'll get an intuitive answer or two. And then you want to, the emphasis is on the word unintended negative outcomes, because the parts don't intend negative outcomes, but negative outcomes can happen. DWIs, divorce, all kinds of bad things can happen out of certain strategies. And then when you find out what those unintended negative consequences are, then put emphasis on this word, gently communicate these outcomes to the part of you that's using that strategy, and then receive the part's reaction. How does it react? And a lot of times it'll just shrug its shoulders or say, well, I don't know what else to do, or something like that. Because these parts are not rocket scientists, number one. They were created in childhood with the wherewithal of a child. But they also don't know what else to do. And so this is what, they're very limited, very one-dimensional. And so once you find out what are the unintended negative consequences and gently communicate those to the part, then you want to achieve a consensus from all parts on a new strategy to test. And we would ask the part, if we find a new strategy that works for you to achieve the positive intention you want, are you willing to give up the old strategy for the new strategy? And if that part says yes, if it produces the outcome that I want, then you go back to the true self and you ask, what are 2 or 3 alternative strategies that would help us to get what this part wants for us? And at that point, you ask it to employ those strategies, and if it would. And then you ask, are there any parts of me listening right now that object to using these new strategies? If there are, then you might have to take them through this whole process. But if they stand down or stand aside and are willing to let it happen, then you have an open door to begin a new strategy. And in the next phase, we can teach the part a new strategy. The next phase is for the L in radical, is to let go of the old strategy and learn the new strategy. So to let go of the old strategy, that's a entailed process, because by this time, to get to the old strategy, we have to have access to the wounded inner child or the exile or whatever you want to call that part, so that we can re-imprint it. In other words, the old imprint is the only alternative to it, so we need to give it a do-over of sorts. And before we even do that, we want to witness what it was like for that part when this strategy needed to be employed. And so we go through an entailed healing process of witnessing and then re-imprinting and then releasing that old imprint experience. And we'll go into deeper details on that in another video. But once we get through the re-imprint and we've witnessed everything that wounded part has been through, and it's received our compassion and our understanding, and it knows we get it, then we ask it, are you willing now to release any residual emotional toxins from that old imprint experience? And so there's a life scripts and parts matrix re-imprinting and release process that we'll go through in another video. So it's basically about having the part go through a visualization where you ask it what element it would like to use if it would like to release that. And maybe it could be wind, water, fire, or something else, an element of some sort. And let's say it's wind, then we create a process or a meditation where we go inside and we see the younger part of me in the middle of a beautiful meadow, and a breeze comes up and you see it blowing across the meadow, and it blows through the child part and blows any toxins away. And you visualize that happening. And when all the toxins are blown away, then you've completed that release process. It can be that simple, or it can be more complex, depending on what we're dealing with. So you might even need to, at this point, use some EMDR or some EFT and some other strategies to deal with deep traumas and so forth. But once that's all accomplished, we re-imprint and re-release all the toxins. Then we want to teach the protector a new job. Maybe it was an inner critic that was mean and harsh, but now it becomes an inner mentor or an inner champion, and it has a new strategy of helping these parts grow and learn how to live in the present moment. So that's a kind of a broad, overarching view of the healing process, and it starts with recognizing that reactivity. So thank you for watching, and I hope this video has been helpful.